visit us. The third story happened a year later, in the summer of 1978. We arrived in a village that was essentially dying. 24 houses stretching along a single street along the lake, a tractor driver and a half, 2.5 machine operators, 3 or 4 old women, a small shop with only one name, almost half the houses already uninhabited. There was a craze back then to consolidate, you see, rural settlements, completely disregarding those with no prospects. This schizophrenic idea resulted in new troubles for the Siberian village, and it was Mrs. Zaslavskaya who dreamed it up. Yes, that same one, not yet MS back then, but a real comrade, a lackey of the CPSU Central Committee, who later became a Democrat. Our brigade, 4 of us, occupied one of the long vacant huts. One day, the 4 of us went out to gather firewood. We cut down a dozen birch trees, sawed them into logs, tossed them into the car, and returned to the village with a sense of duty fulfilled. We had a proper lunch, poured half a liter of vodka between the 4 of us, drank it, exchanged blessings, and, in accordance with a half-forgotten Russian custom, lay down for a nap after dinner and all our righteous labors. It was roughly between 3 and 4 in the afternoon, the weather fine and sunny. To keep our exhausted comrades from disturbing us, we had secured the door from the inside with a large iron hook. I wasn't sleeping or awake. I just dozed with one eye open, and then it started. First, someone was clearly and noisily moving in the entryway. Then, the hook, which had been holding the door firmly and securely in place, snapped off with a loud bang. I was too lazy to get up, too lazy to open my eyes, so I lay there. Fortunately, there was no reason to worry. A remote village, broad daylight. What was there to worry about? It looked... No, I didn't open my eyes. Aha, that's how it was. It was like this. Some man was pacing the hut, stomping heavily, grumbling peevishly, like they've made a mess, turned everything upside down. All sorts of people are wandering here, damn them. The most interesting thing is, I couldn't make out a single word, but somehow I knew with absolute certainty that the meaning of the words was exactly as I just described it. To this day, I can't explain how it happened, but it was just like that, no matter how you slice it. I couldn't make out a word, but somehow I knew the meaning with absolute certainty. I languidly concluded, half asleep, that it must be the owner of the hut, a 50-year-old half-idiot dwarf, the kind you see in villages. He had 2 huts. He lived in one himself and rented out the empty one to our brigade. I remember vividly being a little surprised. What the hell was he grumbling about, that idiot? We hadn't made any mess of him. On the contrary, we'd knocked together a bunk and a table, and the hut was empty. It seemed like a woman was with him, that's what. And then he jumped. Literally, he shot up on the bunk as if he'd been stabbed in the wrong place. That jump, that jolt, that impulse still can't be described clearly. Not fear, not anxiety, not a fit of aggression. The devil knows. He jumped. Something suddenly jumped. Something made him grab a knife. Something pulled him straight to the stove. And then I heard next to me, man behind the stove. The other 3 jumped off their bunks almost simultaneously, and the 4 of us surrounded the stove. Like a dream, like a vision. This vision lasted only for a short time, a few seconds. Then, all at once, it was as if we all came to our senses, perfectly aware of ourselves in reality. There was no one else in the hut except us. The door was closed just as we'd closed it. The hook was slid in just as we'd slid it in. We exchanged impressions in a flash. All 4 experienced the same thing. Heavy footsteps in the entryway, a hook snapping loudly, a man swaying around the hut, grumbling. Words couldn't be made out, not a single word, but the meaning of the grumbling was somehow crystal clear. All sorts of people are here. All sorts of people are here. They've shown up. They've made a mess. And
and it was as if a woman was with him, though she remained silent and hadn't said a word. Then, that very same jolt, again simultaneously, rousing all four of them and pushing them to catch the man behind the stove. So that's the story. We can decisively rule out alcohol as the trigger. What's half a liter of vodka to 4 male organisms, all perfectly familiar with it anyway, especially after they'd had a hearty and satisfying dinner before downing a shot, a drop in the bucket. Before that, we'd spent 3 weeks in the most vulgar sobriety, and finally, no one had ever heard of alcoholic hallucinations capable of causing identical visions in not just 4, but even 2 people. Any psychiatrist or addiction specialist would laugh at you if you approached them with the claim that squirrel causes identical visions in different people. Vodka had nothing to do with it. We were 4 of us, and the emotions and impressions we experienced were as similar as peas in the pod. Someone showed up. Who exactly, it hardly needs detailed explaining. There's this one. They call him different names in different places, but the essence is the same. He lives near the house. He shows up sometimes. Yes, he's a brownie. A brownie. What's the point in curtsying? We lived in this hut for another month, and we didn't observe anything else strange. Except maybe.
You see, there are good places, and there are bad ones. I won't attempt to explain the phenomenon in detail or the difference between the two. Professor Borofsky will do a better job later, but I'll say this. Anyone with experience working in the taiga or even in the wilderness will probably understand perfectly well what I mean. In the places described in the 2 previous episodes, despite the aforementioned oddities, it somehow felt good nonetheless. Finding myself completely alone in the taiga, I felt wonderful, bravely brushing off some rather large strands without the slightest discomfort or inconvenience. I felt right at home, in the wilderness, in bear territory to boot, in a land where invisible cars drive and who knows where old women go. Here, I went several times to the river flowing out of the lake to check the crucian gog traps I'd set there, and each time I felt somehow awkward, perhaps, a certain uneasiness from the surroundings, and it was strange. No dense forests, just bare steppe, just 800 meters from the village into the sparse bushes. Not a single animal for tens of kilometers. But there you go, uneasy, period. And I want to look back for no apparent reason, and it's somehow uncomfortable even on a sunny day, and my soul feels a bit queasy. It was a bad place, that's the point. It's enough for someone who understands. These are the stories. They actually happened. It's quite possible they'll seem boring to some, but personally, 21 years later, I still remember that feeling, that jolt that tore me off my bunk, that grumpy muttering. Even now, it's not the most pleasant of sensations. And then, yes, and then, someone who likes to follow everything to its logical conclusion might suddenly ask, what did you four do then? Nothing. We didn't even talk about what happened to our own people. We weren't drawn to it. For some reason, I don't particularly want to talk about these things, even with people I know well. I only decided to put them down on paper now, after more than 20 years have passed, when the memories have faded and the fear of that time has faded. It all happened. It was exactly like that. And each time I was by no means the only witness to something strange, but one of several. If I'd wanted simply to entice the reader and make a little money at the same time, rest assured I would have concocted a whole bunch of far more captivating stories, far-fetched perhaps, but inventively and plausibly contrived. Forgive my boasting, but the writer A.A. Bushkoff always had a pretty good imagination. There would have been mysterious night shadows, voices from beyond the grave, eerie visions and compelling details. But I absolutely don't want to do that. This time, my goal was to recount the strange events I experienced in as much detail as possible. It might have turned out a bit boring, but that's just how these events are in reality, not in Hollywood. It all happened. It all happened. But there's no explanation. Until now. A strictly scientific one, I mean. And I have a feeling there won't be one for a long time. Here's one seemingly simple example from the same vein. Since ancient times, Siberia has told stories of how a seemingly good friend approaches a person who finds himself alone, whether hunting, haymaking, or otherwise far from home, and invites him somewhere, and the person obediently follows, guided by an unknown force. Then the friend disappears, and our poor fellow finds himself 20 miles from where he encountered this delusion, sometimes on a high cliff, sometimes neck-deep in a river. So, judging by an analysis of dozens of recorded stories, there are only two ways to rid oneself of this obsession. The first is if the person even unintentionally pronounces the name of God out loud. The second is if he asks, "Where are we actually going?" The first is clear, but the second, why this particular question, where, with enviable, unexceptional regularity, leading to the instantaneous disappearance of the leader and the return of the lead to lucid consciousness?